Were there any weird things with CERN?
No, I'm no. I know someone who was there during the eclipse, and nothing burger, just like everywhere else, other than a beautiful eclipse.
Right.
All right, I think we're here. All
We're
right,
here.
so let's get record on. All right, here we are. We'll wait until someone says they hear us, and then we will begin. All right. That's always like the awkward moment, right? Waiting
We
for
are
touchdown.
here. Does anyone hear us? Hello.
Oh, there we are. MEF sent a big pink hand. So we've made contact, which means we can begin. So to our audience of one and ourselves, Dani was just enlightening me to her experience outside of at least this simulation. I don't know that when you leave this simulation, you're not just in like the next one over, right? Like the one, right? But you're outside of this one. And so you were telling me a little bit about the experience you had at Confluence. So anything else you want to share with the class while we wait for the seats to fill?
What I noticed about Confluence, which was awesome, and I had such a good, I really didn't think I was going to have as good of a time as I had. But what I noticed is that there's like two basic mindsets for where we're at right now, and one has way more momentum and consensus behind it, which is after we lose and we're living in slave world, here are our plans. And then there are a couple of us that are like, how about we don't let it get to slave world? And that was like, people are a little confused by that idea that like we actually have power and that we can pivot and course correct instead of continuing to abdicate our power to these fucktard losers who are taking us into a really shitty place.
So, okay. So the one that has like more momentum and most of the people behind it, that is like, we're going down the slave path, but we have secret squirrel plans or whatever it is. Right?
Correct.
Like, is there anything like unique and interesting about their plans, or is it just like basically like slightly glampified bugging out?
No, I didn't hear anything unique about the plans. It was cool to hear Mike Winner, who we were just talking about, talk about Cortal and everything they're setting up, because I didn't realize that it was completely separate from the World Wide Web.
Okay.
So it was cool in terms of what they're setting up there, and I want to have him on my podcast to talk about it. But even in terms of like messaging and email and file sharing and all these things that are off of the web, so they're slower, and there are different ways to do it. But that was kind of exciting of like, oh, this is a cool option. But no, it's just like how to do it, how to homestead, how to live in community, how to extricate yourself from the enslavement system. I did talk to a bunch of people in the like sovereignty common law conversation who had successfully discharged their student loans, which was pretty cool. But I mean, in terms of where you and I are at, no, there wasn't anything like new on the other side, but I was one of the few voices that was like, how about we don't let it get that far? And then there was like the general consensus, which came through one of our chats a while ago of, isn't it too late? And it's like, how can you ask if it's too late? We all still have power, water, we get to trade on the open market. Like, it's obviously not too late because we're still free, but it was like a little bit of a disconnect for some people of like, wait a minute, we can stop this. And it's like, yeah, if we all focus, if we all get together and put our energy on it.
Okay, so I have one more question about that faction, then I'm going to ask you about your faction and make some commentary about that, and then I'm going to propose like a third possibility. Okay, so I've been aware that there is a thing called Cordal and that that's his deal, but I've never been quite clear on what it is. So I look forward to hearing. I've even been to the website, but it was early on in the website where I couldn't quite understand what it was. So I look forward to hearing more about that. The question that you were saying about, so I think part of the reason why people, like a lot of people think we're not free, right? Like you were like, we're still free. And I think a lot of people don't think we're free, right? And so I think that is confusing to some people, and which is why there's more people in that other group. Like there's something more motivating for people when it's like we're not free, but we're trying to create a little pocket of freedom for ourselves, than that, oh, we are free. And it's like, it's up to us to keep it. It's like weird, like the psychology. I mean, there's different types of people who are motivated by different sets of like fears or goals or whatever it is, right? But the other thing, like, and this is where like I have a huge amount of respect for the amount of work that a lot of those people have put into creating these sort of alternate systems and finding community and whatnot. And at a certain point, I just realized like that isn't the reality that represents in any way like freedom or like what I want to do while everybody else is, you know, like goes down the route of slavery. So for me, it was like, that isn't a place for me to invest my time, though I very much like some of those people. And I think some of the stuff is very interesting. And then what you're saying here is like, how about like we can do something, we can stave it off, right? We are free now and whatnot. I'm interested to know, like, what was the conversation more specifically? Like you said, those people had the other people had a lot of momentum and a lot of plans. What were the plans of the people? Obviously, I'm uniquely familiar with you, but the other people who are part of your sort of cohort of like, we can still prevent that, or we're free now. Like, what were the sort of ideas there, if there were any that weren't part of your sort of your set of things that you normally deal with?
So I felt like I was kind of the only one, although I think to an extent Alex Zek was, and I was very impressed with Alex Zek and I actually did have a long talk with him about David Martin, but like consistently from beginning to end, I was so impressed with him. And I feel like after I gave my talk, like all of a sudden I became quite popular because most people had no idea who I was until I gave my talk. And then I think I was popular because I was the one ringing this bell that no one else was really ringing, except Alec to an extent. And so I think it's kind of like twofold. One, I think it's like people still dropping the ball on our own agency and empowerment. And I also think there was a realm of selfishness of like, well, I've got my family dialed, so I don't really give a shit about, and obviously that was not everyone, but I felt like most of that particular gathering, and of course, because it's taking place at Sovereignty Ranch where they're already in this plan. They're already preparing for being food, energy, water, and shelter sovereign. So that was really the bent, which I understand. It wasn't really a let's stop this thing, but it just feels like it was mostly families. And even the people who didn't have kids, which was a lot of them, it was married couples. So it was kind of a more like traditional family values type thing. Yep. And what I see more in that is like, I've got my tribe dialed. I don't really care about anyone else. And what I think it's more of us who are not hooked into that family dynastic paradigm that have more energy available to like be of greater service to humanity. And it did seem like there was less of that, but I did go to this like leadership kind of open discussion circle, which a lot of people said like that was the most generative, the most like useful and cross-pollinating, but it was kind of a side thing. So some people in that circle were more attuned to like, here's some solutions. Like there was a guy who was creating a way to financially incentivize honoring the earth, not in a climate crisis carbon way, but in a way that actually sounded intelligent and doable. So a lot of people like jumped in on like, oh, how can we help with that? But it wasn't so much like solving the problems that would stave this thing off. I think the focus of it was like, here's what we're going to do when we're creating a parallel society because everything has gone to shit. So there weren't a lot of people who had my perspective on it.
So a couple of things. So other than that interview with David Martin and a few other pieces here or there, I haven't listened to a lot of Alex Zek, so I'm not super familiar with him other than like I know some other people that I do shows with or that I've done shows with that are very tight with him. And my take on him is that he's a very disciplined person. The amount that he has accomplished over the last couple of years is immense. You also are a very disciplined person in a very different way than I'm disciplined. Like in some ways that I really struggle with discipline, you're great in, and vice versa. Some other areas that I'm super disciplined, right? But he seems to me, and also like I know who one of his really good friends is, who is someone I have tremendous amount of respect for, how productive and how disciplined that person is, right? And so that I think would partially explain people who tend to be organized and disciplined in that way tend to be more generative in that sense. And other people who like you said, some of it is just like the reality of I have 5 kids and I don't have a lot of energy left after that. And I just want to make sure that they don't get subsumed into the Borg, you know, when I'm not here or whatever it is. So some of it is explained by that. But my guess is just his personality type and his overall way of being is sort of more in line with him. The other person I know who's good friends with him, who's been on my show a couple of times, know I have just amazing, I don't know how he does all the things he does, right? He's like that as well. He also was a high level athlete. The guy that I know, not Alex, I don't know about Alex Zach, but there's like a certain mindset and a certain sort of thing. So I think that sort of probably explains some of that. And if you, I don't know how familiar you are with like David Martin's older material, right? Before all of this stuff. But that's one of the things that, like what you were saying about the person whose meeting you went to, who was about doing things for the earth that weren't like cuckoo climate crazy, but were honorific and generative, but were like, you know, created an economy that was supportive or whatever. David used to talk about a lot of that stuff. Like one of the things that I know he was doing for a long time was going to some of these villages he would work with in third world countries and finding ways of assessing the assets they have in a fair way, so that suddenly, instead of just being some third world country that had no value, it's like, oh no, this is actually like a very productive, this is a worthwhile place. This is very, like he would give a value to like the trees as oxygen machines and things like that, in a way that like turned places that otherwise people ignored into suddenly some kind of like, oh, we should invest in this place because a lot of things can be done here type of thing. But also that was sort of in line with nature. So yeah, it's cool when someone has sort of that way of thinking about it. Okay, so the other thing that I was gonna like propose is like what you explained it in terms of factions, right? And I think it's very you know, this is what humans do. Like they like to create like groups that they can sort of be in that are their groups. And maybe there's a few other groups that are not part of theirs, but that you sort of align with or coalesce with sometimes, even if you have like one disagreement or two or whatever. But in terms of like this bigger question that we're asking in terms of like, where are we going and what is this going to look like here in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years? Like the way that I kind of see it, and maybe this is sort of something I've had to get used to, because I realize that like there's not really a camp that I fall into one way or the other, right? Like the things that are interesting to me, like the things that I really enjoy and that are important to me, like they're at odds with each other on some levels. So like when I'm in my sort of information communities, like most of the people like that, like I would have like, and I'm in my dance music community, like those people have opposing views about almost everything. And then there's like the gymnastics thing and the tennis thing and my food people. And it's all kind of like, there's not very many people who like, oh yeah, they all value those things too, for me to sort of create community with. So I kind of realized like, you know, I kind of have, when I don't mean like go it alone in terms of like, I'm the lone wolf and I'm out there by myself. But like, you know, maybe I have 1 or 2 other people who like 3 of the 5 things that I like or something like that. And they also have found that same thing. And so I think how I see things going forward, there's going to be like a number of versions of reality that you can experience, right? There's going to be like, you know, there's lots of people who are heavily invested in the doom reality, whether they're playing the role of slave or the role of like, we've created this pocket over here for ourselves so we can be free while the rest burns. There's people who sort of, you know, are fighting for something, whether it be justice or a new way of doing things or whatnot. And then there's other people who are creating novel ideas or novel technologies or services or something that can be used by any of those groups. And I feel like the third path is just kind of like, I am participating in this sort of version of reality, or the sort of the layer, the group, the community that sort of matches where I am at that time, right? Like, you can experience it this way, you can experience it that way, and you don't have to be sort of wed to one way or another, right? You're just kind of putting together, patchworking a quilt that works for you. And the way that you sort of give back to any of those groups of people who have helped you, even though you might be doing it differently, is like, this is how I do it. You can take a look at how I do it and make something else that works for you, if that sort of prescribed way, 1, 2, or 3, isn't working for you anymore, but you don't want to necessarily disassociate from all of that, right? How do you sew your own quilt and sort of, move forward with that? But yeah, like, it sounds like it was cool. Like, I mean, that, like I struggle with those kinds of events, whether they be information related, or even like music festivals that are multiple days. Like, I'm one of those people, like, I want to go out for 4 or 5 hours and like be super social and be on, and then like I want to go home and be by myself or do my own thing. So like, being with large groups of people, many of whom I didn't know before that moment, for like many days in a row, like, I don't know, that sort of, I've done it a few times and it terrifies me, and I don't know that I do it anymore. Right. So I'm glad you had a good time.
I have the same thing. And like, historically, there's sometimes where I've like had social anxiety at events. Like, I always feel better when I have a task. Like at Burning Man, I always liked it better when I had an art project to work on. Lightning in a bottle, I like it when I'm presenting. This was great for me because I was presenting, but also like, it was so big. It had a swimming hole. So like, I could just like step away and go for a swim. There were like sheep and pigs and cows, and so there was just so much going on that like I could get, there were times where I was like, okay, I need to go and just stand in the field without any people around me to just like kind of clear my energy. It was really low key that way, so it worked. It was just nice because like, festivals for me, it's like, yeah, we're all open-hearted and taking a bunch of psychedelics, so we're going to connect really deeply, but do we really have shared values? Like, is this really going to extend beyond this? There weren't drugs, it wasn't really like that, but we all did have shared values. So everyone there I did want to connect with, because everyone there was kind of extraordinary. They're all like the biggest outliers, unwilling to go along with the bullshit. So they were super cool people. And then for me, because I've had so many roadblocks in Santa Fe with being able to participate in the community here or get my work out there, it was just so nice to be able to talk to someone who had this project and be like, oh, I have an actual tool, and then tell them about my tool and have someone be excited instead of think I'm a psych, like, it was just nice to be with other cool people.
With other psychos.
Yeah, with just other like rebels who were, won't color inside the lines. And then I think, Alec comes out of the military. So okay, that, he has that.
That doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
And I felt like he and I like had that more warrior thing. Like, I think you're probably, less tortured by the past 4 years than I've been, because you're more detached from this reality construct. I experience you as more detached. You're just more observing than trying to steer it in a certain way. My, with all my Aries planets, my soul likes to play this game as though it can have some sort of effect.
Right.
So when I was talking to Alex I said, I want to talk to you about my friend David Martin, and I want to know, like, are you aware of something he's done that's out of integrity? Are you aware of something he's said that's out of integrity? Or is your primary issue with what he hasn't done? It's what he hasn't said. And it's with what he hasn't done and hasn't said. And that I could really relate to, because Alec wants to shut down the virus bullshit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that was where I felt a bit of a kinship of like, oh, here's someone who really is impassioned about stopping people from being harmed. And it did seem most of the people there were just like, how can I set myself up while the world harms itself?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting to look at people and sort of like the kind of archetype that they are, like the sort of template of their personality and the role that they're playing in all of this. And sometimes like, yeah, he has a passionate thing he's doing. David has another thing he's impassioned about, right? Like I think it's normal for us all to have questions about what someone's motivating factor is, but there is a huge difference between like we think a different thing is important than someone has done something that steps away from the integrity that they say they have. And sometimes when we're in the moment, it's like hard, but once you back away from it, you can go, okay, like I see what they're doing and it's not what I would choose. This feels much more important to me, but I can respect the fact that they said this is what's important to them and they have stayed on that sort of straight and narrow path. And even though lots of people around them are doing stuff, they kind of back away whenever that thing happens. And, maybe they should say something, but maybe that would distract them from doing the thing that they said that they're there to do. So there's like many ways you can sort of look at this. And as for to the sort of detachment thing, right? Like, I wouldn't say that I was always that way, but I think that one of the things that I struggled as a young person to understand myself. And I think that that's pretty common when there's someone who grew up without one parent in the house, right? On some level. And my mom left really early. And though she was around, she was very emotionally absent. And most of the energy that was formative for me as a kid was male because of coaching and gymnastics. And even the female coaches were mostly fairly masculine, right? And so I struggled to kind of, understand certain things about myself. And for a long time, like I was very like fiery and impassioned and fighting everything and resisting things. And I found that like I was not an effective human being in the world that way, either to myself or for anyone else. And as and certainly when I was on drugs, I was real fiery sometimes when I was on drugs, or I was just completely blank, like not just detached and observant, but just like completely fucking checked out, right? Like I wasn't an effective communicator and I wasn't able to take the ideas that I had on the inside of my head and put them outside of my head in a way that could be meaningful or useful to anyone in any way. And as I got clean and as I came to terms with my relationship with my parents and some things about my past, I started to understand like who I was and what things worked both like for me to make me like well and okay, but also so that people could like what I was trying to say was actually what people were hearing and sort of responding to. And I think your observation that you had when we were talking privately the other day about like me being into novelty as opposed to justice on some level. And it's not that I have no concern for justice, but I found that I was not super effective at fighting for justice because I was real into that for a while. But when I started sort of understanding myself and playing with novelty and understanding that I had a mind that could unpack things in new ways for people to understand, I felt like I was able to be much more like effective human being for myself, but like find a way to communicate with people that would be eye-opening or inspiring in any kind of way. And I just do that better and am able to show up as a more whole and complete person. And that said, so that I can do me, there has to be other people who are doing sort of that other thing. And so even sometimes when you're listening to a podcast and someone is haranguing someone over and over about this same thing and not accepting the answer, there's a level of respect you can have for them. It's like, no, I'm here to sort of hold this fort down and fight for this thing. And I'm not going to let you go until I've browbeaten everything I can out of you about this topic. I can certainly respect that. So, all right. Well, I'm glad you had an awesome time. Yay.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yay.
so fun.
Was it? And how was your eclipse?
The eclipse was great. It was, I mean, we were in the same place, so it was super cloudy.
Mm-hmm.
We were out on the grass and they had a tent and they had a drum circle and there was like singing. So, it was just very celebratory.
Yeah. So it was interesting here because it was just like a Monday, right? It was like a Monday. It had been very cloudy for many days. Like it was obviously obvious to me. They were like making the ceiling dense and low and pushing it down and making it thick and clearly trying to like not have the eclipse be much of a spectacle. But I stayed home from work and we just went out here laid on the grass out by the lake, and sort of it got pretty quiet and very dark, and it felt like quiet on the set, like everything had sort of been turned off. And though it was completely cloudy, there was like one hole in the clouds right where the sun was. There was like a little bit of cloud in the middle, but it was like the sun was like moving around it. So we got a pretty good peek at it. And it was doing this sort of moon chasing the sort of sun thing, and it went over there. And when it was in the full eclipse, we got like a good look at it for a minute. And it just looked like a diamond ring. Right? Like it was just like there was the white line around it. And then there was one area where there was like a ball that was sort of more, sparkling and glowing. And instinctively, like aside from like the gross materialistic and corrupt ways that people are interested in diamonds, like why it is that diamond rings have captivated the imagination of people was because of just that brilliant glow and sparkle that came off of that for that sort of moment. I also saw something else like moving in the background a little bit. I don't know if that was the comet. It was just for a second. Like I saw something come across for 1 second, but it wasn't something, oh, something's coming in or something scary. It was like, oh, like the sky is like doing what it does. Like the whole thing was super beautiful. Like it was very peaceful. It was very quiet. And then, 5 or 10 minutes later, everyone just kind of went back to sort of what they were doing. But it was really like, have you ever been to like, I'm sure, because you've been to Burning Man or you've been to other sort of music events or festivals where there's a really tight vibe. And like at the peak of the moment, everything gets really quiet before it gets really exciting. It felt like that, but it was just like the other people that like live in the neighborhood, people you don't really know, or you're not like in the same kind of shared experience that a music festival normally has. It was kind of interesting, but it was beautiful. And I felt like, wow, that was really beautiful. And I was lucky that I got to see that. And like, whatever the fuck all of this like crazy shit people were saying for days and weeks and months, like I felt it was pretty dumb all along. I'm like, really, this was completely different than any of that stuff. So anyway, it was beautiful. But yes, it was. Did you get a peek?
We had full cloud cover.
Oh.
So I got, because we all had eclipse glasses, so I got a little peek, like I'd say half an hour before it went into its totality, but we were under 100% cloud cover. But it did get really dark.
Yeah. All right. Well, I feel fortunate that I had that little carved cutout and I was able to, I didn't wear glasses. Like I just, I kind of did this so I could control the amount. Right. But at a certain point, I just took a full look at it and I seemed to be fine. So,
I mean, the sun's was covered. So it does. I'm always confused about whether we're supposed to stare at the sun or not stare at the sun, or whether it's a psyop to keep us from getting that intel.
So I used to sun gaze, right, frequently. And then at a certain point, I just stopped. This is my experience with that stuff. Since, the spraying of the sky has become so intense, oftentimes the sun is super white. And when it is that white, it's uncomfortable to look at or to gaze at the sun. When you get a good warm orange glowing sun like we used to have, then you can kind of do that longer. Unfortunately, because it was so heavily trailed, the sun was very white. And so that was why it's too bright to look at, not because there was like an eclipse and not because like there's, some deeper reason why you shouldn't look at the sun. It's when they've turned the sun into that stupid white halogen light bulb thing, like it's that, right? But the effect of whatever it was around the eclipse of like the diamond ring, like it had this like really pretty diamond color glow that almost had the little prismatic effect that like a gemstone has when it's sparkling, right? So anywho, all right, well, did you miss the clown show while you were gone?
Well, do you have any highlights to share with me? I know you sent me a Matt Taibbi, but like I basically hit the ground running as soon as we finished our live stream last week. Can you give me the highlights of the sham show? Is anyone else talking about what we've talked about RFK's VP pick?
I mean, I think generally there's this she's a no for lots of people who were coming from the right towards RFK, but for people who he wasn't left enough for, they like her, right? They like that. So there's not been a lot of talk about the VIP pick. I'm going to push everything eclipse related aside and just say like the stories that have sort of been defining the last week have been okay, so like there's like I'll give you the more mainstream sphere of stories, and then the sort of the layer that like we sort of watch and report back to our people on, because they don't watch that layer as much, right? So there was a humanitarian aid food organization that was run by the famous chef Jose Andres, right? Who were doing aid in Gaza. And they actually were there in coordination with like they had been coordinating with the IDF. They were like approved to go in there when the UNRWA or whatever the other group that got kicked out was and do this food aid. So the IDF knew they were there. They were coordinating with them. They were transporting 3 vans from one part of the place to the other part of the place. And the IDF hit them with drones. 3 vans hit with drones. They knew that it was Jose Andres's food team, and they hit it anyway because they thought maybe there was one Hamas militant or something like that that was part of the convoy of 7 people that were taking food. So 7 people died, including 1 American military vet. And Jose Andres, who is a famous celebrity chef in Washington, D.C., and is friends with all of those political people, he has come out now that like, okay, this was intentional. They did this intentionally, and this is not what is going on. There is a crime against humanity. And suddenly people who didn't take seriously the humanitarian crimes in Gaza are taking them more seriously. And so there has been a little bit more of an outcry for Biden to stop sending so much aid and military equipment and stuff like that to Israel. But there's also controversy about, well, they only care because now it involves a celebrity chef and an American and people who are more like of their class of people. So it's a double-edged sword, right? Good that people who didn't care before care now, but like, why does it take a celebrity being bothered by it for you to care? So that's been one thing. Okay. The other thing is that on the mainstream stage is that RFK got a more fair interview on CNN that wasn't pre-recorded, so they couldn't edit it. He was interviewed by Aaron Burnett. And he said in that interview that Joe Biden was more of a threat to democracy than Donald Trump was. So that's been a big controversial topic in the mainstream, but it also has started all of this stuff again, like, oh, well, is he really just working for Trump? And is he there as a, right? So it started like a lot of that conversation. Again, so those have been like the 2 more mainstream news political stories that have captured sort of a lot of energy and attention. And then in the layer of things that we sort of look at, Brianna Joy Gray and Matt Taibbi got into a big fight on. So basically what happened, Zed Jelani, who's a progressive journalist who works at The Intercept, where Matt used to work before he left because he realized there was a problem there, just like Glenn Greenwald did. He like made a tweet complaining about how Matt Taibbi is captured now by his right-wing audience, and he doesn't do anything about the left-wing issues anymore or whatever. And he made a lot of accusations and then eventually deleted the tweets. Okay, but like before they deleted the tweets, Robbie and Brianna grabbed them and they did a segment on there, and Brianna sort of was kind of in line on a lot of things with what Zed Jelani had said. And she has a lot of complaints about Matt. And so they did that piece and it created an uproar. And then Matt Taibbi came on the show and he got the most aggressive I've ever seen him get with anybody. And it was funny because he had a full face of, he had let his facial hair grow out. And then by the next time I saw him, he shaved it. He's like, he couldn't take the itch. But he had like the full goatee and he was like being all aggressive. And I was like, Matt, right? It was like kind of sexy. But he was taking her to task on things that she said that were completely wrong or that were, and he was basically saying, and they're wrong because you covered it. Like, I'm not going to get into all the details, but she was wrong. And every time she was wrong about something, rather than saying that I will make a correction to that previous story, she was just saying, I have no interest I can see it. I'm wrong. I have no interest in talking about that. Let's get to the thing I want to talk about. And he was wanting to extract a full correction from her as a journalist wants to do. For some people, he was like, it was minutia, but as a journalist, that's the most important thing. If you get it wrong, you should correct it. And if someone else gets something wrong about you, you ask for a correction. right? And she just was, because she's a lawyer and not a journalist, was more interesting and interested in getting into the parts that she wanted to get into. And her main complaints about him is that he's not, you know, he is more, he doesn't cover the topics she cares about as much anymore. He's not as overtly sort of left or progressive as she would like him to be, and that is doing a disservice to those topics or those issues and those communities, as he has been more, she thinks he's moved to the right. And he's like, well, only if you think free speech is a right-wing issue, which of course is what people think these days, is that free speech is a right-wing issue, right? You'll hear somebody say, oh, like First Amendment, that's fucking Trump shit. Or, you know what I mean? You hear people say that.
What did she say to that?
When he said that, I mean,
Yeah.
there was so little content able to be gotten to because of the way that they were arguing.
Got it.
But it was nice to see him stand up for himself so aggressively, because he usually allows himself to be a little bit rolled over.
Right.
She looked like a jackass. She got a lot of things wrong, and she just looked like an bitter and angry bitch, right? Kind of thing.
Oh, I want to watch it. I'm excited.
Yeah. So there was that.
And now you have a new crush on Matt Taibbi.
Well, I mean, I've had many crushes on Matt Taibbi for many different reasons over the years, right?
Really?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you would call them crushes, but I feel kinship with him, right? Like, he was dancing in the hexagon next to mine, in the hypercube next to mine at a rave, right? So, you know, like we've been through this many times, and he signals to me in almost every show he's ever on by wearing some item of clothing that is highly identified with the acid rave scene at a certain time period, that yes, what you saw was real, but don't tell anyone, to which I just keep blabbering my mouth, right? I'm kidding, not kidding on all of this, guys. Anywho, so there was that. Then, so that, like, that took up a lot of air sort of in that section of the media. And then also people, you know, this whole, now it's okay. Now, like, a lot of people in mainstream are starting to have small questions about unconditional support for Israel. And so there's a lot of coverage about, like, you know, well, that's great, but like the grossness of it had to go this far, and that it had to be for this reason or that reason. And then also a different aspect of the conversation about, like, what is RFK really doing, right? You know, and so yeah, so that's kind of what the main things have been in the different tiers. I'm sure I'm missing things. Oh, and then the other thing is that, like, Brazil has clearly become, like, you know, I'm sure you followed some of the stories that Glenn Greenwald has told over time about this Alexander de Moraes judge who seems to have, like, more control than even the president or anything. And he's the person who, like, got rid of Rumble, you know, made Rumble shut down because they wouldn't censor in Brazil. And he's, you know, basically gotten people banned off of social media sites and stuff like that. He tried to get Elon Musk to ban certain Twitter accounts or X accounts or whatever, and Elon Musk won't do it. So now he's launched an investigation into Elon Musk. And so now Elon Musk is concerned that Brazil is a dictatorship, right? Kind of, when it's a dictatorship when somebody tells Elon Musk, right? So, like, so now there's the renewed conversation about whether Elon Musk is a free speech warrior or not, right? And it's kind of like the same thing as the Israel Gaza thing. It's like, well, great that you can kind of see that there's a dictator in Brazil, but shitty that it took it affecting you before you even noticed or cared, right? So so I have a couple of clips that I've brought. So I've given you the summary about those things.
Thank you.
I have a clip of Matt Taibbi being interviewed yesterday by, so Sabby had Matt Taibbi on because she agreed. Sabby and, like, the RBN, Sabby and Do Dissidents people, they know that Brianna was wrong. So they've been somewhat defensive of Matt, and Matt's going to be on Do Dissidents, I think, tonight or tomorrow. And he was on Sabby last night. So Sabby wanted to kind of go through that with him because she kind of supports his position on that. But then there was this interesting segment of the conversation where she asked him what his thoughts were on Israel Gaza. And this was interesting. And I'm not sure. I have many minds about this, about what he had to say here. right? And so I'm going to play that for you. And then I also have a clip from Due Dissidence of Bill Ackman's latest shenanigans now that they're in damage control over Israel because of what happened with the Jose Andres thing. So these are the things that I brought to share, to induct you back into, or to, you know, to seduce you back into the clown show or whatever it is. So here we go. So let's go to, wait a second, that doesn't work.
Thank you for catching me up to speed.
You got it. Okay, so here's Matt. Here's a segment of Matt Taibbi last night on with Savvy Sabs. Fair use. Here we go.
There's all kinds of other ideas in there that make me nervous and should make all liberals nervous. But right now, this picture is mostly about, you know, violations that against sort of people on the Trumpian right. Although I would say the speech stuff also goes the other way, but people just don't pay attention to those stories.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to pivot into Gaza. As you know, the war in Gaza has been going on since October. I've talked about it a lot on this show. I'm sure you know Katie Halper has been covering this probably just about every live stream. She's really good on this issue. Same thing with the gray zone. I want to get your opinion about the war in Gaza. How do you feel about what's happening there? There was just a statement from the Pentagon released that they do not consider to be what's happening in Gaza genocide. I strongly disagree. But how do you feel about that, and where do you stand on this particular issue?
I'm probably generally in agreement with you. You know, Israel-Palestine is a story that I have never liked to comment on for a couple of reasons. I had some bad experiences trying to cover a couple of protests once upon a time that left a bad taste in my mouth. And the other thing is, it's a very, very complicated story with a lot of history, and I don't know anything about it. Like, I would love to just go there and learn more about what's happening rather than opine from a distance. Like Ukraine, I know a lot of that stuff. I lived in that part of the world for a long time. But you know, this is an issue where I just don't like to get in the. I found throughout my career that no matter what you say, unless you have it 100% nailed down, you get in trouble somewhere. And I just don't know enough about it to feel like I'm really an authority on it.
You get in trouble about it with who? Zionists?
Anybody. I mean, I don't feel like I have an obligation to talk about things that I haven't covered. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are issues that I spend a lot of time on and comment on a lot because I've covered those issues. I've made phone calls on those issues. Like, I feel like I know what I'm talking about. And with Israel and Palestine, there are elements of that story that make me uncomfortable. And I just, you know, the world can go without my opinion on that matter, I think.
I think I disagree with that, Matt. I think genocide is a serious issue. I'll tell you, Glenn Greenwald told me one time, he said, no one is an expert at everything. Like he had warned me about this. He said, nobody is an expert at anything. I don't care how long you've been doing this. So, you know, what it taught me is that if there's an issue that I don't know much about or I don't feel comfortable covering, I reach out to people who are experts on that issue. I think it would mean a lot to, especially a lot of people watching, to hear, you know, how you feel about what's happening, because a lot of people do see you as a prominent voice in independent media, and they do value your work. And I don't think that you should have to be afraid of the pushback that you're going to get. Just look at people like Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal, for example. They get a lot of pushback. People smear them all the time, but that doesn't stop them from speaking the truth.
Right. I just can't stress enough. There are things about this story that make me nervous, and I feel like, you know, it's the first rule in medicine is do no harm. So if I don't say anything, I'm not doing any harm.
How is speech harm?
My job is to get stuff right and not get stuff wrong. So, you know, I understand that there are people who would like to hear from me on this issue, but I don't have a whole lot to add on this issue. I'd be regurgitating something that I got from somewhere else, and you know, I'm not a news service. I sort of disagree with that whole conception. Like, there are 2 or 3 things that I spend a lot of time on because I cover them over and over again. I'm constantly talking on the phone with people, and this issue just isn't one of them. I know that people feel like that's ducking, but that's the way it is.
Well, you're a parent, Matt, right? Like, so you're a dad. How do you feel about the children? How do you feel about the kids that have been killed in Gaza?
I mean, not good, but again, I don't want to talk about this whole thing. I just don't. I mean, it's not a news story that I would voluntarily talk about. Let's put it that way. If I went there and did a story, then that would be different. But right now, I just don't feel like I need to be in the middle of it. There are a lot of people talking about it already. I just don't want to chime in.
Okay.
All right. So I found that to be a fascinating segment for many reasons, and I will give you the first say on it, and then I'll tell you what I think.
I was just struck by his body language. He was so like fidgety, and he wasn't like owning his like when Ben was pulling his thing with Candace, where he's like, I won't talk about that, but he was still in his power and clear. Matt was so like, that was weird.
It was really weird, right? So
that was weird.
Like a couple of things, right? Like there's part of me that appreciates that a person can't be an expert on everything. And if it's something's not in your wheelhouse, then being like, I'm not the expert on this. There's part of me that's like, okay, like, you're always talking about like, why is the nuclear physicist chiming in on consciousness? Why is Robert Malone an expert on propaganda? So on one level, right, there is that, but on the other level, there was this weird discomfort thing, right? And then there was this like, it was very bizarre, right? It was hugely bizarre. And so like and he has been, for whatever grievances people have with him because they feel somehow abandoned by him on their topic when he moves to something else or whatever it is, he has been very open in interviews talking about a wide range of things for a really long time. And so this was kind of weird, especially because he started it with, I think I mostly agree with you. And then it got weird from there. So yeah, like that whole thing was just bizarre, right?
Also, Savvy didn't ask, like, do you have any news on Gaza? She said,
Right.
What do you think about Gaza? So for him to defer, like, I'm not reporting on it, like, it just seemed bullshit and Weasley.
Yeah, the whole thing, it was really weird, right? And so like this was kind of, there was the sexy facial hair, aggressive Matt the other day, and then that was just like, ooh, crush over for a while.
Trying to sell itself shut again over Matt.
Right? But there was a couple of things in there. Like I do generally agree that not everybody has to have an opinion that they are wanting to talk about publicly about everything. Oh, we just had a little feather thing flying up. On one level. But the other thing is like, okay, I'm trying to think with all the uncomfortable stuff he's talked about, what could be making him so uncomfortable that he's unwilling to talk about this one? Because there's a lot of crazy shit he's talked about, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what the origin of his last name is. His last name is Taibbi, which I think is a Middle Eastern last name. So I don't know what the heritage of the background of his family is necessarily.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the heritage of his wife is. Like I know he is part Taibbi is a Middle Eastern sounding last name. That's his dad. I think his mom is Filipino. I think he's actually part Filipino or something like that. Or she's like half Filipino. He's an interesting looking guy. But I don't know like what his wife's family is or any of that kind of stuff. Like the discomfort, he said something like, I wouldn't want to upset anybody. Is that like somebody close to him, right? Where like he is, I'm not saying that this is okay or good or bad or whatever, but he's so overtly opinionated about so many other things that this weird shrink back, because it doesn't feel to me like he's one of these people who's profited greatly from, Zionists, like some other, whatever. It doesn't feel like that, like what is this, right? So that was weird. And I thought just to balance out the usual glowing commentary on Matt Taibbi, I would show the weird thing too, because we all, right?
But I also feel like Sabby dropped the ball on that, because she could have asked the question in a number of different ways.
100%.
You know, like, because, okay, you're not there on the ground. You don't know what's going on there. Fair enough. What's your opinion on American support of Israel?
Correct.
What is your opinion on American?
I think she was shocked. I think she was shocked. Like, I think she could, I think she was shocked. And then she felt a little bit of that emotion that she was able to be critical of Brianna of like, what? You're not exactly in line with me on my most important time. She couldn't believe it, right? And so I think she didn't scramble well for like a new angle on the sort of interview or whatever it is. Or you also could have just said, well, hey, like if somebody were willing, if somebody was willing to send you there to cover the story. So he seems to be a fairly neutral person. He could easily go into both Israel and Palestine and have people speak to him. She could have come at it from that angle and be like, well, what about that? Like, what would you think about going there and doing that kind of story on this or whatever it is, right? There was a number of things she could have come back with that she didn't. It was just like, well, I disagree. And so that's not okay, right? Like it didn't make sense, her sort of comeback on sort of what he did.
And her thing with the kids was like
low blow.
Because it's also like, if he's saying he doesn't know what's really happening there, that question is going to get the exact same answer. None of us know what's happening. If you don't know what's happening through our screens, that's not going to change with the children. I wish it's one of those instances where like her own passionate opinions on it, I think, clouded her ability to get a different response from him.
Correct. You could have asked the question. You could have gone on to another topic and then wound back in. And so there's a million things you could have done. And yeah, but that was a little weird. So I thought I'd share because sometimes it's interesting to watch the weird moments. All right. And then here is our good friends over at Do Dissidents keeping track of Bill Ackman for us because we haven't been paying close attention. Here we go.
Thanks, guys.
So, folks, we covered a lot in our last show. Our last show was really half devoted to the media's change of tone when it comes to the Israel-Gaza war. And now all of a sudden, Morning Joe has turned on Israel. Morning Joe is, grilling Israeli spokespeople about Netanyahu and the suitcases and the Qatar, and they're saying we should condition aid. This is ridiculous. It's out of control. So now it is no longer acceptable to back Israel unconditionally. And so now everybody is in damage control mode, including the aforementioned on this stream, Bill Ackman. So Bill Ackman puts this out. The fucking balls on these people is unbelievable. He puts out a 5-point plan for the rebuilding and reconstruction of Gaza. He wants to rebuild Gaza. Hey, God, we love Gaza. Genocide? What genocide? Oh, come on, we didn't mean anything. We just leveled the whole place and killed a few, 10, 20, 30,000 of you over and over and over again. We smeared anyone who criticized that as anti-Semitic. This guy literally had college kids canceled for speaking out against this. And now here's my 5-point plan. Here he tweets out a few high-level thoughts on a potential solution in Gaza. Step 1, give Gazan residents something to look forward to. Without hope, there is only despair, anger, and violence. Hope comes from Israel's and the United States' commitment that once Hamas is destroyed, Israel and the U.S. will support the creation of new Gaza, subject to security commitments from the U.S. and Gulf states.
Pause.
New Gaza is completely...
Right? I know, right?
Okay, but like before we even get to that, I thought there was a word limit on Twitter. Has Twitter changed?
Yes,
I'm taking it Twitter's not the same anymore.
Correct. I think there's no word. There's either no word limit anymore or it's like a much longer word limit. Yes, correct.
Okay.
I'm not even on Twitter and I know that. There we go.
Okay.
Rebuild. I feel like this should be like a commercial. We should do like an AI commercial. It's like a SNL parody video. New Gaza is completely rebuilt with modern infrastructure.
He's talking about like they cleared weeds to build a subdivision.
Yeah, well, he's talking about like this is a new housing development. Like,
condos.
you're
No,
like presenting it to shareholders.
It's so sick and it's so completely out of touch. Like they just don't understand how much they've lost control of this narrative.
Exactly. That he didn't know how repulsive this would come off.
Wow.
New Gaza is completely rebuilt with modern infrastructure, sustainable energy, and clean water. What do you know? And world-class architecture, technology, healthcare, education, favorable taxation. Oh, what, Bill Ackman? Are you going to fucking move there? Favorable taxation. Favorable taxation. Yes. Ron DeSantis will be the elected governor of New Gaza. People are leaving New York for New Gaza by the droves. You can't retire in New York anymore. You have to come to New Gaza if you want a comfortable retirement. Property taxes here are fantastic. Thoughtfully
Masks
designed.
optional.
Yeah, right. Yeah, masks on. No mask mandates in New Gaza. Exactly. Thoughtfully designed business creation incentives and world-class resorts on the Mediterranean. The design of New Gaza.
Basically, he wants to build Hudson Yards in Gaza.
Yes, exactly. Yes, Hudson Yards. For those who don't get that reference, the sort of 30s on the west side of New York City, that was like the last industrial neighborhood of Manhattan, and they very recently got rid of all the taxi cab stands, the horse stables, the mechanic shops, and put up these new fancy luxury apartments. So that's what he's talking about, in a shopping mall and everything. So yes, the design.
It looks, I call it the Borg ship.
Right.
Like it looks like if you went to the Borg homeworld, that's what their architecture would be like.
Yes, indeed. The design of New Gaza begins immediately with a global competition where master planners, architects, technologists form consortiums to compete for a large financial awards and opportunity to build a new city from a blank sheet of paper.
Offensive.
Totally, right?
This is fucking insane. Bill Ackman is now king of Gaza, and he's deciding what we're gonna do with them.
Well, remember, this is the same thing that, what's his name? The guy who's married to Trump's daughter.
Jared Kushner.
I remember when he was saying, like, I don't want to talk about the crimes of humanity. I want to talk about the new business opportunities that are going to be on the flip side of it.
Talk about my new condo.
Correct.
The fact that it's a blank sheet of paper is proof that you and everyone who supports this belong in the fucking Hague, not tweeting out these plans about how you're going to rebuild it as this new business mecca in the Middle East. New Gaza is a model city. Think the Saudi Neom.com, but on the Mediterranean. New Gaza is rebuilt and governed by a consortium of Gulf states and the U.S.
What? What?
Right?
So that sounds to me like he's admitting that the U.S. was involved in this attack on Gaza to take it for their rich vacation zone.
Well, also, if that's where the portal is, then they want that, dude.
Correct. Wow, this is repulsive.
Economic and tax incentives are designed to encourage private foreign investment. So private sector investors have a vested long-term interest in Gaza, and businesses are incentivized to locate in Gaza. That's step one, folks. That was a long step one. So step one, come up with a big plan for New Gaza. Step two, civilians in Rafah are moved to a refugee camp safe zone built in the Negev desert adjoining Gaza. So clear the people out. Step three, IDF destroys Hamas. Step 4, the reconstruction of Gaza begins. Step 5, civilians return as the city is rebuilt. As always, I welcome your feedback. Well, I gave him some feedback.
Here's my
We'll get to in a
feedback.
second.
Fuck off.
If you have nothing constructive to say, please keep it to yourself. Fuck you. Like, how could you say that? How could you say if you have nothing constructive, like you've been constructive this whole time? Flamethrowing accomplishes nothing. Hey, don't be mad at me. I just canceled a bunch of college kids who spoke out against the genocide. Flamethrowing accomplishes nothing. If you think this is a bad approach, please share your better ideas. So now you have some of these Israelis who are trying to, like I said, curry favor with society after
I'm going to stop right there. If it weren't so gross, that would be the most clown show humorous thing we've ever heard. But that was actually like one of the sickest things, if not the sickest thing that I have ever heard. Plus, as you said, a huge admission.
So has he been called out? Is Bill Ackman canceled? Is there pushback for this asinine proposal of his?
Well, this was the only place I've heard it discussed was here on the Due Dissidents show.
Wow, what a tool.
Right. But I mean, this is, you know, like it's one of those things that's so shocking that you're like, is that the Onion, or is that the fucking Babylon Bee? Like, what the fuck is that? Right.
And why would you put it out in the public? Like, sure, as a private memo to your fellow, like, butt fucking Templar secret society losers, but why would you put that out in the public and think you're going to gain favor?
But this is like the entire, like, this is the tone deafness. So we heard the same thing from Jared Kushner. And this was the whole thing, like all along, all of these alternative media, like, well, not like the sub, like disaffected sort of like your Tim Pools, your Stixy, the people who are like sub-right alternative media, mainstream blend kind of thing. They were always praising Trump's work on the Abraham Accords and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I always hated that. Because like here, like the main problem in the Middle East is the issue about Palestine. And here you have this peace accords that completely ignores Palestine. And like, you think that's okay and that's good. And then it's just like, oh, well, we'll deal with Palestine later. If everyone else is at peace, then that will just work itself out. Like, what the fuck, how tone deaf are you? But when you hear Jared Kushner say that, and then you hear Bill Ackman saying this, that is obviously a coordinated strategy right there to they want that property. They want to do that there. They want to create, you know, have you seen that, like that weird, like city in a line in Saudi Arabia that they're building, or like some of the shit they have in like Qatar and Abu Dhabi and Dubai that are like these weird, like, it looks like Westworld, right?
Okay.
Like it looks like Westworld, and it's, you know, the crazy, you know, but that's what it feels like. It's just like, oh, like we don't, like people don't matter. We're just building Westworld. Like we want to build a new park, right? And like people be damned, like this kind of thing. And there's no, like, it's unabashed. It's not even, he wasn't even trying to like guard it in like some kind of like bullshit. It was just like, this is my naked psychopath. What do you think?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me you were, this is like him, like, tell me you're responsible for this October 7th thing without telling us you're responsible for October 7th.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I thought those were like, those just felt like the two most appropriate clips to welcome you back with.
Those were
And
awesome. Thank you.
let's go over and check the chat room to see what's going on over there. All right.
Okay, my favorite thus far, I haven't seen them all, was Michael saying New Gazaria.
Yes. Sister Nino is good for a good kazinger every once in a while. Yes. All right. So let's see. Oh, there's not too many things written in there today, so I can kind of go through a few of them and see.
Skywalk Treese I am says Taibbi is an Italian name. His dad, born in Hawaii, had a Filipino mom.
Taibbi is an Italian name? That isn't, I would never have guessed that was an Italian name. Interesting. Okay. If anybody, Trixie, we talked all about Confluence in the first half an hour of the show. So when we hop off, you can rewind to the first 30 minutes and get the full debrief that Dani gave me. But for now, if anybody has any questions, comments, or even any answers, all capital letters in the chat box now. You have a few minutes, go.
And if anyone on here has successfully discharged your student loans using common law, definitely let us know. I mean.
All right, so let's see.
So Flat Earth Hippies had a couple interesting things to say about Cordal, and I would love, like, Flat Earth Hippie, if you could message me, because I would love to learn more about how you're using it, if you're using it on the regular.
Yeah. Oh, Benjamin Balderson in the house tonight. Love me some Benjamin Balderson. Do you know Ben, Dani?
I don't think so.
He's so cool. I love Ben. I love Ben.
What do you love about him?
Well, like when you meet someone like that you've known, like watched for years online, and you meet them in person, and they're like exactly as represented. Like, you know, like I love that. But he's just like, he's from South Dakota, like Laura. but I just felt like I felt as soon as I met him, I felt like those people you can feel that they love you right away, and then the feeling is mutual. Like and his wife is lovely, and like I don't know, I know he's really my friend, even though I don't know him that super well. Like I love Ben. I just love Ben.
Aw.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Thoughts on Ecuador raiding the Mexican embassy. Okay. So I did see that, like, I saw something come through my feed earlier that was showing some sort of raid on something in Mexico, but I wasn't clear what that was. So I didn't understand that Ecuador raided the Mexican embassy. Is there anything else you can say? Tell me about it. So I saw that something was happening at the Mexican embassy, but I didn't know what it was. If you can give us a little more information, so I can't have an opinion on it because I don't actually know what that is, but I did see that there was something going on. All right. Anybody else? Anybody else? I wonder if we know who Flat Earth Hippie is, if there's an identity beyond Flat Earth Hippie or
Notice how Flat Earth Hippies picture looks a little bit like Lifeboat Foundation, but it's pokier.
Yeah.
By the way, Santa Fe Institute had a talk.
Oh my
last
God.
night.
I know.
Did you see that it said "Hello, comrades"?
Comrades, like went full on communist. I almost wanted to bother you on your vacation with a screenshot of that, but once you told me you were like fully off, I was like, I'm gonna leave her alone.
Dude, I reserved 2 tickets and I tried to convince my friend Deb to like power back. We were like, well, if we leave Monday right after the eclipse, we could but Confluence was so fun, we didn't want to leave early, but I had half a mind to go.
Okay, so then the other thing that they just posted 4 hours ago was multiple worlds containing multitudes, right? But yeah, I was very curious as to what this comrades, let's optimize the surprising rebirth of the planned economy, right? I was just like, but like I've been, like the main place I hear people refer to each other as comrades is on RBN, right? But they're pretty open about what their politics are, right? But Santa Fe Institute, like this, I think is it a test run? Is it to see, like, did you go to the comment section? We should see if anybody had a problem with the use of the word comrades, right? And also, like, because they announced it so openly, like, you could probably contact them and just ask them, hey, I'm really curious about the use of the words comrades. Is this sort of an invitation into communism or what? I like do it in your way. You're very good at being sort of diplomatic and professional when you're first contacting these people for this stuff, and then like later it breaks down. But like the beginning stages are always good. So I would love the background on the decision to use the term comrades as the opening statement about the whatever the fuck that is. Yeah.
I'll see what I can drum up for us.
All right, see if there's anything else in all capital letters or not. Let's see, everyone's agreeing with us about that. Gray Zone has some coverage of Ecuador. Newer Ecuadorian president is a U.S.-born elite Harvard educated. Well, I think.
Wait, what? I'm in the dark. Ecuador raided the Mexican embassy. Did Ecuador declare war on Mexico? What's going on?
Let's pull it up. Let's do like a brief live research here. Okay. Let's go YouTube and we'll go Ecuador, Ecuador.
While you're looking that up, MEF is saying Gray Zone has some coverage of Ecuador. New Ecuadorian prez is US-born, elite, Harvard educated, and indigenous are being targeted as terrorists when they are protecting their territories. US military is involved. Remember when K-Rock went graphic commie? I don't remember, but I'd love to remember. Nigel, I don't remember.
Okay, so here's just thing. Mexico breaks diplomatic ties with Ecuador after police raid. Ecuador storms Mexican. Okay, this is what this is. So there's a story on Breakpoints that my head went to. Well, wait a second. Wasn't there just something that happened at the Israel? Like, didn't Israel go after the Iranian embassy in Syria or something like that last week? I think that was before you left.
Okay.
So there's a video here from Breaking Points. I guess this is 2 days ago. Says Ecuador storms Mexican embassy in Israel copycat. Let's listen to a minute or two of this. This is from 2 days ago. So I just found out. I just knew that there was something.
You want to share the screen?
I'm just going to get through the commercial without sharing the screen real fast.
I love seeing what commercials you get targeted towards you.
Yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson on this one, which is funny because somebody sent me a text talking about Neil deGrasse Tyson today. So the phones and the computers are always listening. Here we go. Let's unmute.
And get to the potential fallout from that Israeli strike on a consular building of Iran in Syria, because, you know, it's easy to lose sight of this because so much of the conversation has been about those World Central Kitchen aid workers. But at the very same time, you had that strike.
I can't not do the fashion update whenever she's on.
I know, her ruffles.
Her shirt doesn't fit, the ruffles. Again, it's like she wants to be on the prairie so badly. Inappropriate for a journalist. No.
It looks like she rated Anthropology. That's the issue with the clothes at Anthropology is they all have 3 too many ruffles for me to ever wear them.
I would kill to see you in a ruffle.
No.
Which was a violation of Vienna Conventions, quite an extraordinary provocation on the Israeli part. And now the question is, how is Iran going to respond? All of the actors involved seem quite convinced that there is almost, as a necessity, going to be some sort of Iranian reaction. So what is that going to look like? Let's put this up on the screen from CNN. Their headline is, U.S. preparing for significant Iran attack on U.S. or Israeli assets in the region as soon as, the headline says next week, that would be this week.
I think they changed the title of this once this thing happened, because all of the other reports about the Mexico embassy thing are from today, right? And sometimes they'll take an old video and change the name to try and get more hits. Let's just take a quick, this one is from 7 hours ago. Let's take a quick look at this one.
Okay.
People may remember this wild footage from back in January out of Ecuador. We can roll up this first VO here. This was a group of gangs. A gang leader was broken out of prison in Ecuador. The climax of this wild insanity that you're looking at here is these gang members taking over a TV station live on air, holding people hostage, and really putting an exclamation mark on what had become an extraordinary kind of devolution in Ecuador from one of the safest countries in South America to basically what is drifting towards a narco state run by kind of U.S.-backed gangs at this point. Now, that brings us to just last Thursday, there was this remarkable moment on the international stage where you had Ecuadorian forces burst into the Mexican embassy. So this footage was released yesterday by Mexico. These are kind of basically Ecuadorian stormtroopers here outside the embassy, busting their way in here. They're looking for the former vice president. They run into embassy staff, as you see here, top officials there, throwing old diplomats down onto.
Okay, so I don't want to watch this whole thing, but what I'm grokking maybe is that the ex-Ecuadorian vice president was hiding in the Mexican embassy in the same way that like Julian Assange had been in the Ecuadorian embassy in London or something like that. And so, but it's still a violation of the sovereignty of Mexico for that to happen. And so it's like highly looked down upon. There was a military attack by Israel on the Iranian embassy in Syria, right? It's a little bit different. It was more of like a war kind of thing. This more seems to be like a corruption kind of thing. I have to learn more before I have anything intelligent to say. So sorry if that's
okay,
not.
Matt Taibbi.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I don't remember the K-Rock rebrand in the 80s really. So, all right. I think we're at the end.
I think we did it. Thank you so much for guiding us since I was offline. You did a phenomenal job.
My pleasure. Thank you to everybody for coming to play. And we will be back next week, at which point Dani will be further immersed in the clown show, and so it will be a bigger and better circus. That Flat Earth Hippie says, please leave a link so I can join your Patreon or whatever it is. If you come back to this, I post all of our information in the description box underneath the video after the show. So as soon as it posts, but you can go to Flat Earth Hippie, you can go to wordspodcast.locals.com and use the promo code welcome to words, all capital letters. It's one word, welcome to words.
Oh,
Yeah.
wait, hold up. I know we're signing off, but Nigel just said Ecuadorian embassy holds Assange in London. So we can look into that for our next show.
That was before. Remember, before he went to prison, he was in the Ecuadorian embassy. He's been in the Belmarsh prison in UK for a long time. He's in prison.
Okay.
Right. So, but that was the example I was making is that like you can keep people in the embassy, and that host the country that the embassy's in isn't allowed to come into the embassy because the embassy is the sovereign territory of the country that has the embassy. Right.
Correct.
So that was my point. Yes. Okay. So Flat Earth Hippie, hope you understood that. But if you come back in a little bit, all the information will be in the description box for the video when it posts. All right. Thank you, everybody. Good night.